Good afternoon and welcome to our meeting. The date is April 15, 2025. The time is 6 p.m. This is an open meeting of the Grand Island City Council. The City of Grand Island abides by the Open Meetings Act in conducting business. A copy of the Open Meetings Act is displayed in the back of this room as required by state law. We have some folks coming in. I'm just going to wait a moment. And now that you've all taken a seat, I ask that you please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The city clerk will now perform roll call.
Council President Sheard.
Present.
Councilmember Stelk. Councilmember Conley will be absent. Councilmember Nickerson.
Present.
Councilmember Brown.
Present.
Councilmember Hazy will be absent. Councilmember Mendoza. Present. Councilmember O'Neill.
Present.
Councilmember Pollock.
Present.
Councilmember Lanfear.
Present.
And Mayor Steele.
Present. Also present are Jill Grenier, the city clerk, Laura McAloon, the city administrator, Carrie Fisk, the city attorney, Patrick Brown, the assistant city administrator and chief financial officer, and Keith Kurtz, the public works director. A sign-up sheet was available in the lobby for individuals wishing to provide input on any of tonight's agenda items. If you did not sign up to speak on an agenda item, please come forward, state your name and the agenda topic on which you will be speaking. No one has come forward, so we shall continue. The first item on our agenda is recognizing Grand Island Utilities Department workers. And I am proud to take this moment tonight to recognize a group of individuals whose commitment, grit, and heart often go unseen, but whose impact to our city is undeniable. I'm talking about our incredible Grand Island Utilities line workers and dispatch operators. Over the past several weeks, they've shown what it truly means to serve our community, not just with skill, but with selflessness and resolve. On March 19, a powerful blizzard rolled through our city and knocked out power to more than 10,000 residents. In the middle of brutal conditions, these men and women were out in the field, restoring power, keeping people safe, and bringing light back to our homes. And they did it in less than 24 hours, which is an extraordinary achievement. They didn't stop there. Just a few days later, our crews packed up and headed to Fremont to help their community recover from the same storm. They were tired. They could have stayed home, but they didn't, because that's who they are: helpers, neighbors, and public servants in the truest sense. Then on April 1st, as strong winds clocking in around 70 miles per hour swept through North Grand Island, they were right back at work. Multiple outages hit the northwest and northeast areas of our town. Once again, our crews responded with incredible speed and professionalism to get power restored. Let's be clear, this kind of dedication is not something that we should ever take for granted. The work they do is dangerous, it's demanding, and it's absolutely essential. And thanks to them, paired with the lowest combined utility rates in the entire state, Grand Island continues to set the bar, not just for Nebraska, but for what a municipal utility should be. to each and every one of you who was part of these efforts. On behalf of the city and the people of Grand Island, thank you. You've done us proud, and we are deeply grateful. At this time, I invite our Utilities Director, Mr. Schmitz, to please come forward and tell us about your utilities employees and who you have here tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First, just to reiterate, you said a lot of good things about that day, but was in contact with a lot of utilities that day throughout the storm. One thing I was really proud of our guys, and it's a judgment call in those storms and those conditions, but they stayed on through the entire storm. There were some utilities that had to pull off due to site conditions, and our guys stuck with it throughout. Most utilities were not back on for all their customers that night across the state. In fact, I don't know many utilities that were in the path of the storm that had all service restored that night, except Grand Island. The guys did amazing. We have predominantly, if you go average age, we have a younger crew, and they just did phenomenal. I just can't say enough about how they did. Fremont, at one point, lost power to their entire city. OPPD, it was a top 5 costly storm in their history, is what they published. So it was not insignificant what happened. Lincoln got hit hard. Southern Power got hit hard. Grand Island came through pretty good. And then not only that, but then followed by that strong storm that came through a week later that sawed off poles north of Dairy Queen, and the guys responded again. So just a great group. I want to read off who's here tonight, and if I miss anybody, please let me know. But I'll start with the line and underground group. So to let you know how a storm goes, we have our line and underground groups, right? Guys out in the field chasing things down. And then we also have our dispatch center, which is manning the controls, looking at the meters and corresponding with the field crew. They're the eyes on the controls. And so I have people from both groups here, and they were very busy that day. From the line and underground, Josh Hartley is the manager. You guys come up and stand up here as we read off names. Brian Fiala and Scott Bauer managed the storm control center for our line that day. Scott handled the winter storm, and Brian was on the one that came through the week later. If you guys come up here. And then we have Logan DeJourneys, and if I kill your names, I'm sorry. Jared Wood, Tristan White, Garrett Porter, Eric Vodenall, Jimmy Brzezinski, and Frank Rodriguez. I think that's all the line and underground. So that's our line and underground group. Those guys were the guys out in the storm that day, getting your lights back on. And as far as, and I've got 3 guys here from our dispatch center. So Travis Spees is the manager of our dispatch center, and Jeff Hegel is our energy supply manager, so supervisor. So he's directly supervises the dispatch. And then we also have Chad Holmes over here, who was one of the guys at the controls assisting that day. So those guys were there from the dispatch. And then I don't want to leave these 2 out, but I have Lynn Mayhew, who's the assistant utility director over here, and he manages our production division, so he keeps the generators going those days. And probably our Swiss Army knife, I like to call him, is Brandon Cluthy. He's our safety coordinator on staff that we added this year, and he is the liaison between all the groups that make sure everything's functioning. So this is a pretty good cross-section of the crew from that day, and I'm personally appreciative, and I hope those guys recognize that. And Lineman Appreciation Day is Friday, so thank you, linemen.
Mr. Schmitz, would you get with your group? And I want Brian Schultz to take a photograph of all of you.
Filling in for Spencer.
Yeah. What remarkable city employees. Mr. Sheard, would you like to say something?
I just wanted to add, I have coworkers, employees that live in south central Nebraska, and a couple of them weren't as fortunate as what we were here in Grand Island. Some of them had to lose power for over a day. One of them told me she had to clear out hundreds of dollars of food out of her freezer that was lost. And I don't know that people really take time to think about how it personally would impact your budget if that happened here, and how much you saved people money and lives and their livelihood. So from the bottom of my heart, just knowing, just thank you. I mean, that's huge. That's a big financial impact and a benefit that you guys provide that you just don't get enough thanks. So thank you guys.
Mr. O'Neill.
I just wanted to add a little bit to that as well, too. Kind of coincidentally, just before the big storm, my group actually met with Ryan Schmitz, and we kind of had a tour and explained a lot of how the utilities work. And later on, I met with Lynn Mayhew and had another tour of some of the other facilities. And I am so impressed by the level of infrastructure and the overall work of the staff and the team that you guys have at utilities. As a business, that day, we had basically no issues. You guys had everything up and running early in the morning, and everyone was so impressed by how fast you guys moved. And I praised you personally all over the community that day as well, and everyone had holds you guys very, very high regard in the community, in my opinion. You guys are heroes out here, so just want to praise you a little more as well.
Thank you for being here. It's uplifting for us to have you and to know what great work you do for the citizens of Grand Island. And I wanted to have this opportunity to tell the people of Grand Island what great employees we have at Utilities. Thank you again. We'll now proceed with our agenda. The first item for discussion is Financial Expenditure Review and Fiscal Year 2026 Budget Discussion.
Thank you, Mayor. It's always good when the room clears out when finance starts. Okay? That means we have no problems. So we'll just go ahead and get started here. So tonight it's going to be a tag team. Again, it's just question and answers as we go along. I'm going to start out this presentation, and then Mr. Schultz will get more into the actual budget discussion. So the City of Grand Island enters 26 budget process with very cautious optimism. The economy today is very unpredictable. We don't see that changing in the near term. While local economic indicators remain generally positive, several factors take careful planning and prudent financial management. Economists expect U.S. domestic product after inflation to expand 0.8%. They were predicting a 2% GDP, but it will be adjusted down. So in 26, they're looking at a 1.8% GDP. Again, with all the uncertainty in the economy, these numbers will change daily. The Nebraska economy is projected to experience modest but stable growth in 25. Again, cautious, expecting a slowdown in growth. The state's overall revenue outlook still remains positive. So non-farm income is expected to grow by 3.6% in 25, slightly outpacing the expected inflation rate of 2.5. Sales tax revenues, that is our largest revenue for the city, for the general fund, and for projects. Just to reiterate, the sales tax at the half cent was passed in 2004. Half of that goes to city facilities, public infrastructure. The other half goes to property tax relief. And in 2018, as we have stated before, has a sunset in 2028 or 29, I think. And that sales tax goes to public safety and infrastructure and our streets. So with the uncertainty of the economy, we're projecting right now we're 1.5% better than where we were at this time last year. So we're looking at a projection of a 1% increase, or actually a 2% increase. This is just shows where we are today. So we're just we are at the halfway mark. This is 6 months in. And so we are on par with last year. So with inflationary pressures persisting, particularly in construction materials, fuel, equipment, and contracted services, we're really going to be watching our spending dollar. Even though the inflation rates have stabilized and peaked in 22 and 23, they're still elevated compared to historical norms. So this will impact both the operating budgets and capital projects that we do have planned. So the departments are encouraged to prioritize essential purchases and seek efficiencies where possible. We do that every year, but in particular, we're really pushing it for this year. The broader economy continues to send mixed signals with all the different tensions, supply chain volatility, and changing federal policies. Could all influence local conditions in unpredictable ways. We can see slowdowns in agriculture, transportation, or manufacturing, and that could have a ripple effect across our Grand Island economy. Given this uncertainty, the city will maintain its commitment to conservative budgeting practices, ensuring that reserves are adequately funded and contingency plans are in place to respond swiftly to any changing conditions that could arise. In conclusion, again, it's a lot of repeat I've been saying. We are financially strong as a city, as an organization, but we are taking this next year very cautiously, and we're going to see how the economy goes and how everything else goes. With that, I am going to turn it over to Mr. Schultz.
Thank you, Pat. Good evening, everybody. I'm just going to give a little brief overview in regards to what the actual process looks like. We have some new council members, so for those of you that are not familiar with our internal processes, I'm going to kind of go over some of that. So we do have a process. It is not haphazardly put together. So everybody at their spot should have a printed out calendar. This is the latest and greatest draft. I say draft because we might change it every once in a while. As you can see, it was updated today. So not to give Pat any grief. So what we do is we do prepare that calendar at the beginning of the season, and we are in that right now. The March, April kind of begins the beginning steps for us so that we start looking at so we can have it approved in front of you guys in September later this year. So what we usually do at the beginning of that process then is we sort of sit down and we say, what are the parameters that we anticipate utilizing as we begin to talk to departments? What is the revenue stream going to look like? What are the expenses going to look like? It's kind of what Pat was just going over, some of the factors that we bake into our thought process so that we're hopefully successful. And I'll kind of break those down a little bit more in future slides. And then we kind of get into the next steps where we have a budget software, ClearGov. Pat just had the transparency side. There's an internal side, and that's what we use to put all the numbers into, come up with the budget book, et cetera. So we will kind of give some initial numbers into that software, open it up for the departments to utilize, put their own numbers in. That's where they'll make their FT request, any capital items, whether that's projects or equipment, so that we can workflow those back into the budget operations. Then once they have their budget inputted, we begin what we kind of use the term one-on-ones. So I believe Jason's not here, but Mitch sat in on those meetings a few years ago where we had the administration team, the finance teams, and then the department and any team members they bring with them. We literally go over line by line on their budgets, asking, why is it increasing? We gave you the parameters, why are you deviating from those, so we can get some input on, does it make sense to make an exception or not to some of those? And then obviously we will be back in front of you guys with some presentations. Generally, you guys get high-level presentations that cover the general fund, the enterprise funds, and any of our major special revenue funds. That would generally include community development with Amber's stuff. Alan kind of has some stuff, but the big one would be the streets department, their dedicated special revenue fund. And then later in the season, we will also have where you guys will approve the BID budgets. all 4 of them. There will be a fee schedule that will be in front of you for any changes that would go into effect 10/1. There will also be an individual property tax request, and then a salary ordinance, and then finally the city budget. Those are all unique items that we're legally required to adopt so that we can move forward with any red tape that we have internally or externally with the state, et cetera. Any questions specifically pertaining to any of what I covered? All right, moving on. If you have any questions while I'm rambling, please let me know. So, kind of talked about the budget parameters. So, what is it that we actually envision using for the upcoming FY 2026 budget? So, right now, we are anticipating to looking at about 2% of our revenue increases from last year's budget. So, that'll put about $1.1 million more revenue into the overall bucket that we're looking at. And we are anticipating coming forward later this year with a property tax request of keeping it flat for where we have been the last few years. There's some different factors that go into that, but our plan would be to keep it flat at this particular point in time. Yeah, go ahead.
When you say keep it flat, do you mean the rate or the amount?
I mean the amount.
Okay, thank you. So if valuations go up, the rate would then?
The levy would go down, correct,
All
yes.
right.
Pat kind of went over the sales tax, so there wasn't a whole lot to talk about on that side of the revenue, but that's mostly what that 1.1 made up. So I'll go into the expenses a little bit. So we are anticipating operating expenses about 10% across the board when it comes to operating specifically. We generally break down expenses into 3 primary buckets: operating, personnel, and capital. So due to inflationary pressures, just everything costs more. I think we all know that. We all feel that at your place of business or at home. So right now we're estimating that we're going to need it to be about 10%. And I mean across the board for the whole general fund. And so that puts us about $1 million increase. So there's going to be departments that have higher needs or different needs than other departments. So that's where the one-on-ones kind of come into play. We will evaluate it, all the bits and pieces, so that by the time you guys see it, we've looked at the whole picture together and try to keep within those parameters. Personnel expenses, right now we're anticipating 4%, and that includes salaries, that includes benefits, so health insurance, pension match, things like that. We're anticipating trying to keep it right around 4%. We have some current bargaining unit agreements that we're required to keep those things intact. And right now we're actively negotiating multiple bargaining unit agreements as well. So right now we have a best guess at this point, and as they get a little bit closer, we'll try to hone that in a little bit more. Yeah, Mitch.
This may be a little bit premature, but it may show up later in your presentation. With all the tariff talk and on today, off today, reduced a bit, increased, are there items that will affect Grand Island? I'm trying to think things the utilities may buy that might be, I don't know what you may have to bring from overseas or what's made elsewhere, or other departments that are affected in the same way. Have we had a chance to kind of think through each department director? Are they saying, wait a minute, this looks like this is going to be impacted for us?
Credit to our department directors. They all think about those things, on a pretty regular basis. They know what their needs are, but we do have those discussions internally. Tariffs one day, no tariffs the next day. It's kind of a crapshoot, but we are in the back of our mind when it comes down to it, addressing those. Ryan's division, they've had issues for years on some of the transformers, are like 2 years out on lead times. So we're already working like post-pandemic lead times at this point. Are they going to get worse? Are they just going to cost more? I mean, it's everybody's best guess at this point, but our crystal ball is, telling us the only things that we know, and for us, it's trying to be what we know now. And so we try to predict what we can, but I mean, it's literally a crapshoot. So, but they do keep those things in mind when they're looking towards the future. So.
Well, and a lot of this just happened recently, and we're just starting the process. So I don't know, and this is just a quick question. You may know the answer. Ryan might have to step in here, but do you have things that you have to import, or is everything made in the U.S. as far as you know, for what you use at the utilities, those big components that are lead times and all.
The generation discussion that we're going to have later could have implications. I think a lot of the transformers are locally made, but that doesn't mean the commodities that they procure are overseas. So I wouldn't say we have direct effect, but I'm guessing indirectly we're affected, that we don't, beyond what we know. So the manufacturing facilities for the cable and transformers is American-based, but how they procure their stuff, I don't know.
Okay, and then a question for Keith. Other than vehicles, which of course just going to, I don't know where all these vehicles are manufactured, but anything come to mind and that just pops real quick, so that, oh, this may be a big deal for us?
Not right quick. We are looking at a UV system for the wastewater treatment plant. We've looked into it. We're researching different options. That'll come before council hopefully sooner than later. But the system, for example, that we're looking at is a newer version of what we have now, essentially to handle higher flows, parts availability, all those kind of things. That, for example, is not affected by any of this. They told us. Now, there might be price increases for other reasons, but as far as the tariffs, it won't be affected price-wise at this point. So I'm with Ryan. Most of the things we're getting here, plastic pipe or manholes, I mean, they're made in Lincoln or Scotts Bluff or wherever. So those aren't affected directly, but there might be some indirect things that we don't really know about. But the big ticket stuff, I don't see.
Other than vehicles, we know it just depends on how this thing comes together for vehicles and who manufactures them where, but okay. Just wondered if anything just popped that you guys were thinking of recently.
Oh, Mitch kind of hit it on the head with the vehicles. So police vehicles, we get 8 to 10 a year. So do we go to 4? You know, kind of wait this out? Don't know. So.
Yeah, and there should have been a giant disclaimer on this. Everything's subject to change, I guess I should say. So it's my get out of jail free in case all this goes to hell. So anyway, the only other comment as far as expenses would be kind of our FTE strategy going into FY 2026. Currently, our internal guidelines that we're sort of going to be utilizing are no new FTEs in the general fund for 2026. The only exception to that would be if there's some revenue impact sort of factor that would play into that for one reason or another. So it's not entirely off the table, but at this particular point, we do not anticipate any future FTE requests in the general fund. And a little bit talking about use of vacancy savings, and some of this was in the packet, but I just want to kind of reiterate it to you guys and just make sure that we're on the same page about what it is that we're suggesting. So every year, in any given year, if we were fully staffed and everybody was making exactly what I said they were when I'm making my budget, fantastic. That's not reality. The reality is we have turnover. There's some positions that are really difficult to fill, whether it's years of service, credentials, certifications, things of that nature. So we always have vacancy savings, and so one of the things that we've talked about is what do we do with those vacancy savings? Because right now they basically go to the bottom line. When Pat shows his 5-year budget spreadsheet, a lot of that excess cash balance is due to vacancy savings. And so what we're going to talk about is what should we do with those? And I will go into more details on that in a second. So any parameter questions on anything that we kind of covered? Yeah, Mike?
Your operating expenses that are proposed,
Yeah.
and we're supposedly going to keep between 20 and 30% in reserves as we're directed. What are you guys looking at for reserves? Are you going to keep 20, 25, figure 30?
So Our anticipation would be, and that's where I think I'll kind of get into it in a future slide here. So if I don't answer your question when I get to that point, just hit me up again and I'll get to go. But we do kind of have a plan on what we're going to do with that, so.
And where is the other half of the vacancy savings going besides?
But I'll skip ahead and that's fine.
Oh, okay.
No, you're fine, you're fine. So basically what we're anticipating doing with the vacancy savings is sort of splitting them into two camps. One would be, and the blue circles indicate that it stays in the general fund and the orange is a different fund. But we anticipate keeping half within the general fund specifically for staffing stabilization. So whether that means, you know, COLAs, bargaining unit agreements, health insurance increases, things of that nature, because everything's going to cost more in the future. So making sure that we keep that in there specifically to address those issues. The other half specifically, we'll take an annual review at where we at on the cash reserve minimum, making sure we meet that 30% minimum threshold. If we're good, like we have excess cash, which that would be great, right? So hopefully we do. Then the remainder, we plan on shifting over to a capital improvements fund specifically. So we do anticipate moving it out of the general fund specifically, and then that would be deemed committed is the terminology for governmental accounting. That's just an internal commitment though. It's not restricted at this point. We could use it for whatever you guys dictate or the plan, but that way it's not just sitting at the bottom line of the general fund and it looks like we're sitting on a pile of cash.
Yeah, because I know our maximum, we're directed to keep 30% as maximum for a rainy day.
Correct.
But if you're having people quit through attrition and just retirement and stuff like that, I would think that their excess, I wouldn't call them excess wages, but the wages that have been figured for them for the year would go back to that department and help that department out.
Yeah, and we don't really look at it at a department by department level necessarily. We look at it as a global general fund level. But yeah, I think I agree with what you're saying. I think most of it, and I think that's why the design is the way it's designed, is to help make sure that it still stays in the general fund for one reason or another, whether, yeah, they quit or it's a new position, it's been difficult to fill.
So you guys are looking at the 30% to keep it around. That's probably a good idea this year.
Yeah, our goal would be to hopefully get it close as possible on any given year around the 30%, and hopefully, you know, we don't want it to be much lower than that, obviously, but we don't want a whole bunch of it sitting in there unused either, so. I don't know which one of you buzzed in first. Go ahead, Mark.
What's your policy on your vacancy? How many years do you keep it on?
Oh,
Open position?
like if I added a position and it just never gets filled, do we
It's
like?
never filled in
do
2
we
or
axe
3
it
years?
someday?
Or, but
I would say we don't really have what I would call an official policy necessarily in regards to that specifically. What we do look at though is on an annual basis, when we go over their budgets, we are asking about staffing levels, things of that nature. And so if they were to go unfilled for an extended period of time, that would come up during that process to say, do you still need this? Otherwise, we are just budgeting $100,000+ for an all-in staff member, and it's never going to get used. So that gets addressed during the annual budget process with them, but there's not technically a policy exactly.
well, I guess my thoughts are, is there any consideration to reevaluate that position if it's been over a year or so? Do you need it, or are you getting by fine with it, or?
So, yes, and I'd say that the department heads, and generally Aaron is involved with HR, because when it comes down to recruiting, they're trying to actively recruit those positions. So there might be a discussion that's like, you're never going to be able to fill this position for one reason or another. So it does get evaluated on it doesn't generally just sit there stagnant and unfilled. But Laura, do you want to weigh in on that?
I was just going to add that there might be positions that we keep in the salary ordinance so that the authorization for the position, the job description, and the step pay increase is set by city council, and we keep that on hand. But there are definitely positions that have been in the salary ordinance that have not been funded in the budget. So that's just a matter of if a department head comes back with a budget request that says, okay, now's the point in time when I need to add this maintenance worker to this department. We've authorized that position, but we would go to the city council for that budget approval.
I know some of your positions are so technical and they need major level education, engineers and that kind of stuff. And you do national recruiting, but
Yeah, and I know I was looking at, where are we at on general fund vacancy savings as of now, and it's not to pick on Keith, but he's here, and he does have technical positions that have been historically difficult to fill. So they're constantly evaluating, where do they advertise? They review the job description, they look at the requirements of it, like what is it that maybe people aren't, actively putting applications in that are good candidates for us. So, and I would say that's an ongoing thing. They don't just let it sit there for months and months and months and then, hey, how come we haven't heard anything? Obviously they want to fill those positions. They're needed, they're wanted. So what do we need to do to, make those more enticing or, advertise a little bit better, so.
all right, thank you.
Yeah, Jack.
Thank you. You said that you're not anticipating allowing any staffing requests unless they're revenue supported.
This particular point, that's the mentality, yeah.
Was that a direction out to the directors to say, just flat out, don't bring us any? Or are you going to entertain some that might, let's say the fire chief says, hey, we need some new positions. They're not allowed to bring them to you, or you're just?
No, they're allowed to, obviously allowed, but the message has been, we see this as an unpredictable budget year. So if you're going to bring forward a staffing request, there needs to be a very strong justification for it. This is not a year to just assume you can grow your FTEs. So everybody is always able to bring forward a request, but the message is strong. We want you to be fiscally conservative in your staffing budgeting this coming year because of the uncertainty.
And with that, thank you. That's what I was hoping. With I forget the terminology used, the vacancy savings.
Yes.
Can that be used as a contingency of sorts?
So, and part of this is.
For staffing specifically?
Yeah, and so part of what we're hoping to get from you guys today is this type of feedback. And the reason being is that what is on the screen in front of you right now, we can't do because fiscal policy doesn't actually allow us to do this. So there will be an item in the future where we will actively have you vote on changing the fiscal policy to allow us to do X, Y, and Z difference. Because right now, by today's fiscal policy, I could just use this for one-time purchases. So we earmarked $300,000 that did not get spent for personnel, let's say. I can only use it for capital in the next budget. I can't use it for personnel expenses. That's how the current fiscal policy reads, which obviously was not the intent when we passed the budget. We wanted it to be used for people, not for stuff. And so we've realized that we've sort of got into this cycle of that's happening. So they just keep going to the bottom line, and that's not really the intent. And so the idea that we had internally was to present a different solution to utilize to hopefully address that specifically. And so if you guys want it to read somewhat slightly different, we are open to feedback in regards to that. This is not I'm not telling you this is how it is. This is just sort of where we're at in the process and our internal recommendation at this point. So
Is general fund staffing stability, maybe you explained this and it just went over my head, but does that mean you can be flexible in how you staff? Staffing stability there, I would think, is almost a contingency plan of sorts.
I would use the words differently. I would say, like, instead of dipping into reserves, like our budget is unbalanced because revenues and expenses don't match. So now it's unbalanced. But is it unbalanced because of people? then we could offset this so that it's effectively balanced, then, yeah, so,
Thank you.
yeah. Mitch, go ahead.
Let's talk real numbers using your example.
Okay,
Okay, so let's use $1 million. Currently, we've got $1 million of vacancy savings. Under the current policy, what happens?
so in the current policy, I would say $500,000 stays in the general fund, and it's gonna help offset people cost. Because right now, we're anticipating people costs going up, so it's gonna help offset that. The other 50%, I would say we have more than 30% right now, so we don't need that in the general fund to help. It would all go into capital improvements fund, where we will earmark that for future projects or other capital items. So, would you agree with what I just said?
So yes, so part of this policy is up to and not to exceed 50%. So to your example, so in today's current way we do things, that $1 million goes to the bottom line, okay? It goes to one-time projects. So
There are no
whenever,
other options.
yeah, whenever council decides to spend that money, that's that. What we're proposing is, let's say that, we have personnel savings or personnel costs going up in a following budget year, okay? We're proposing to use up to 50% of those vacancy savings the prior year to help fund those.
Prior year, and that may not be $1 million, it might be $380,000, it could be
Correct.
anything.
Correct. And another part of this is, it's not to add FTEs. This is for funding of current FTEs. We don't want to get into the practice of, hey, you have this extra money, we can hire more people. It's a continuous cost. We don't know what's going to happen in years 2, 3, 4, 5. So this applies to current FTEs.
So what you're using as an example, if we have vacancy savings and we have money left over, we obviously don't need the money to pay for people that we don't have. Does that make sense? I mean, because we haven't filled those positions, we've got extra money, but you're saying we want this money to be used to make sure we cover personnel costs, but where's the other personnel costs
So
that this would go to?
I'll dumb it down to like just, let's say one. Let's say one police officer. So we were 99 out of 100 people we filled last year, so we had one vacancy. So let's say that person was $100,000. So should we use all $100,000 for capital projects next year? Or should we keep 50,000 of it in the general fund to help pay for them for next year, hoping that I can hire them next year or not, really is the question. Because the other half, that 50,000 is still gonna come from property tax, sales tax, or other normal revenue streams that we already have budgeted. But then hopefully we're not relying on those as much because we already got the money from this current fiscal year, or the prior, I guess, that we're trying to carry over for the next year. So it's to help dampen the blow on the upcoming revenue stream by keeping the money that we already have earmarked specifically for that item or that person, so.
Would you ever reach a point where you just are accumulating a slush fund? I'm going to call it a slush fund. The numbers just keep growing there because you're not meeting the personnel requirements.
Hypothetically, I mean, that situation could arise, yes. I
But,
mean,
I know we have to flesh this out, and Mr. Brown, you can help me, but I know it says 50% to the general fund staffing stability bucket, but you said that's up to 50%.
Yes.
And it's my understanding that finance will provide guidance for the council as to how much you think is prudent to slide into that fund.
Absolutely.
To answer I had the same question this morning that Mr. Nickerson did. Does that just become a massive fund that, because we don't need it, just grows and grows and grows? But the intent is that finance every year will look at that fund and decide whether money should be slid from vacancy savings over into the general fund staffing stability fund. Is that a fair representation of what you told me this morning?
Yes, yes, it is. And it also depends on your revenues and what you're forecasting revenues. If you have good revenues coming in, you don't need half the vacancy savings from the prior year because you have those revenues, okay? So we will recommend that we do not do that, and it all goes into your 30% cash reserves. The rest is going to go into capital improvement fund. So, you know, do we want to grow that? We absolutely do. So.
Seems a little wishy-washy to me right now at this point, but I guess we'll see.
We'll bring it back.
Yeah, it just seems not all the dots are connected in my mind on how that would work.
So one of the things that it does for the city is it reduces our reliance on fluctuating taxes, sales tax revenue. So Pat's point about when you have a goods, we are very highly dependent on fluctuating revenue. We have kept the property tax levy, not the levy, we've kept the property tax ask flat. So as we've done that, we rely more and more on the cyclical revenue that is sales tax and the different types of sales taxes. So if you enter into a recessionary period and those sales tax revenues go down, if you are essentially using your savings from the prior year as a savings account to help fund your operating expenses, primarily your personnel, we're reducing our reliance on a revenue stream that can fluctuate highly based on the economy. So, and then knowing that we can move it into the capital improvement fund, one of the challenges in budgeting has been we have these big capital projects, and unless you are a department that has budgeted out to do capital projects over a standard period of time so that you're spending about the same amount every year on a capital project, we have some departments that do that, but we also have other departments where the demand on capital needs also fluctuates. So think of parks, right? So as you add to those capital projects, you've created a savings account to pay for those by transitioning these annual vacancy savings that we know we'll have because we are conservative in our budget and we assume that every position is going to be filled, but realistically that doesn't happen. So it just creates savings accounts for specific uses. Some of it is rolled over into the next year's operating fund. Some of it gets rolled over into a savings account to use for capital projects.
Do you remember off the top of your head what our total vacancy savings was last year of everything combined?
I think it was roughly around 3.6 million.
Holy cow.
That's not the word I use, but it's pretty close.
Wow. I mean, that much in vacancy savings?
Yes.
So Mitch, to your point from a few weeks ago, when you looked at the line of the reserve account growing over the years and not coming down, we keep adding to that reserve account. Right now, those vacancy savings are going into that reserve figure, and it's not targeted for anything specific. This just takes, we continue to put it into reserves, but we put it into reserves that are allocated to a specific use.
And I understand, and I think it's exactly the right thing to do to try to make sure we have flexibility with those funds. This just seems like an unusual way of doing that, but you guys, that's what you do. You come up with solutions like this. But I'm not in favor of just keeping this capital improvement fund with a big pot of money that you really can't do. You're going to have to go just spend it on purpose to get it used on things you may or may not really need when you need them. And I don't, because when you got 10, 20, 30 million extra dollars, you don't want to just go out and spend 10, 20, or 30 million dollars just to try to get back down to even, just to spend it. But we need to spend it on things we really need that make sense, and that's all part of that process. But this allows us to have a little flexibility with those funds other than just keeping this pot getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
It does. And so to answer your question, and that's coming later, is so by moving this cash to a capital improvements fund, okay, let's just say it's going to be 20 million. We now can use that as for borrowing. So we could do more projects quicker and then have that money and then make the bond payment. And so you can really manage that, and you start spending it, and you start doing it for projects. I mean, how many parks projects do we have? I mean, it's crazy amount. And so, you know, and especially with this year, I'm hopeful that towards the end of next year, interest rates will be down, and that will be the time to borrow and get these projects going. And like I said, you know, we would do like one project at a time. We could do 3, 4 projects at a time and borrow that money and be very safe and conservative with what we're doing.
So you're following this logic of personnel vacancy savings should go help to support future vacancy or future personnel needs. So those tie together closely, but so you couldn't take that personnel vacancy savings and say use part of it for future operations, because now you're muddying the water at that point, or is it just easier from an accounting standpoint? Is that all you're going to be able to use it for? Or are there other opportunities you could use to make it legitimately useful, or do you limit it to the 2 that you've got, capital and future personnel needs? Can you go beyond that?
Sure. Whatever council decides, actually. It's your decision. Yeah, I just had a thought. I will tell you, you know, again, depending on economy, we're very conservative in our growth in tax revenue. Okay? I'm not real confident in forecasting what's Target going to bring in, what's a casino going to bring in. Give me a year. Next year's revenues could be much better, and we're not going to need that need of vacancy savings. You know, so then if we don't need it, we make sure cash reserves are good, and then we move that. Either council could say, hey, up your operating expense, maybe, or just let it go to the capital improvement fund and just fund the projects that we want to start. So.
Okay, then one more quick question. This is just the question that Pat may know just because he knows all the numbers. Is there ever a year where we have an operating expense surplus? I mean, where we
always
spend
have
everything?
we always have savings there.
So we have savings there as well?
Yeah, but we're pretty tight. Those guys, they have to fight for their money, and they use their money.
They try to spend it. So you don't have a $3.6 million surplus there. You may be lucky to. Yeah. Okay.
You can also look at that if you don't dedicate that reserve just to personnel stability. In a year where your sales tax revenue has gone down, but you want to maintain that same property tax ask, you want to keep the property taxes flat, you can use that money to achieve that goal, right? You don't need to ask for this much in property taxes because you have savings from vacancies.
Right.
So cities have used that to balance their property tax ask.
That's another point that you reminded me of. I think we need to challenge ourselves to take a look at the property tax ask, and do we need to keep it at 12 million, or do we look at gradually reducing that, maybe $500,000, with some of this stuff that we're talking about? That's real savings for folks on their property tax. So I know I proposed that last time we talked here too, is maybe we don't ask 12 million this year, maybe we ask for 11.5. I'm guessing we can sure make up that $500,000 with everything we're talking about, and especially if we have a new policy. Just thoughts for future discussions, but there comes a point where we can pat ourselves on the back for saying that we're not asking for any more, But sometimes I think it's even, we can take the pride in saying we've just asked for even less than what we've been asking for, and we can afford it. And so that's just me talking, thinking out loud again, so.
Before I call on Mike, my only last thought about that specifically is there's a lot of red tape that the state is throwing at us, you know, when it comes in regards to property taxes specifically, so we've kind of shied away from doing too much different with that. But I've talked to other partner cities in our area that they're planning on raising property taxes just out of necessity. So I would just be cautious before we start lowering. I'm obviously not advocating that we increase them, but I would just be cautious, that's all. Anyway, Mike.
I think a contingency plan is a real good idea. I can see where the 50% won't be set in stone. It could be 45, 40, somewhere in there.
Fluid, yeah.
And probably the same way with the 20 to 30% reserves. I can see it being a little low, a little high. But we always have labor costs, and our labor costs are always going up. This contingency fund would be for any group, correct?
Within the general fund, yes.
In the general fund, okay. That's all I needed to know, thank you.
Yeah, and this I should have specified, this flow chart was just more of a simple example. It's a good tool in our tool belt to allow us to be more fluid if need be.
I think it's an excellent idea because you guys can do this without raising property tax and probably going to drop the mill levy some. I think it's a good plan.
Jack, did you were?
Yeah, I guess the only thing, two things, I guess. Mitch brought up a good point about not just being forced to spend the money, but isn't that kind of what we're doing now?
I wasn't going to say that, but yeah, I mean, we're kind of in a situation today. So like if my graph just didn't have the upper right quadrant, that's literally what we do today. So yeah, I mean, we try to keep the money there if we need to, but it really all has to get capital. So whether we're spending on capital here or we're spending on capital there, we can only spend it on one-time items. And so this was really just to create more transparency around it instead of the general fund just having a hoard of cash. We know we have dedicated and earmarked this money for one-time capital items. So.
And Pat brought up he triggered a good thought in my head that casino, Target, we don't necessarily have a huge influx of people moving here yet. And I'm sure our employees are just as primed to be poached as anybody else to work at some of these places. So I'm assuming we're going to have additional cost in keeping employees and hiring new employees. Does this fund allow us to recruit? I mean, is it used for all employment needs as far as like turnover costs?
I know what you mean. And we've kind of gone back and forth over the years on whether personnel costs should be used for recruiting specifically or not. I would say it's hit or miss on whether we use it that way. We did specifically a few years ago as police were struggling a little bit more with their vacancy situation, specifically earmark it for that. Because if it's not getting used for people, we might as well use it to find said people, was sort of the argument that we made. And so, and it's still a personnel cost, you know, it's just external instead of internal kind of, but there's not a real set policy specifically surrounding that logic, but yeah, at the end of the day, if we don't have people filling butts and seats, then we should find that money to try and find them, I think is the logic, so. I won't go over too much more because we kind of specifically talked a lot about that. That was kind of my last slide. We just jumped ahead and went over the specific graphic, but are there any specific questions, just curiosity questions, anything that we haven't explicitly covered tonight that people want to ask? Mitch, go ahead.
This can cover the revenue side or I don't know exactly what all, but these are questions that have come to mind here just recently. And we probably don't know the answers yet, but you can probably let us know if you think there's an impact. We already talked about potential tariff impact, but I'm also interested in looking at everything that operates within our city with the streets and and maybe even utilities, but everybody that we have grants, we have federal grants, we have state dollars, we have all this stuff coming in. We know the state's still 300 million short. We don't know what the feds are going to do. We know what they've been doing to some people. Are we at risk? Are we aware of anything that stands out as potential risk right now with federal funding or state funding that we've been banking on that might come back and bite us this year?
We have done a pretty thorough evaluation, I would say, of all of our external revenue streams that are non-general fund, which would include federal grants, state grants, private grants, things of that nature. We're constantly on webinars and meetings and things of that nature, kind of keeping us up to date on what we have available. And, like you said, it's fluctuated a lot. I would say at this particular point, there has been no specific thing that we were like, oh crap, we don't have that anymore. Some of them we were really scrutinizing and double checking and called our grant reps and things of that nature, and everything is still okay as far as things that we had explicitly counted on. There will be future grant opportunities that just will not exist anymore that we had, sort of looked at in the past as potential revenue streams or opportunities. There's a BRIC grant, for example, that just will not exist anymore moving forward. We've talked about it multiple times with Laura and about maybe we could do this, maybe we could do that, and John Roseland, and well, that opportunity won't exist anymore. So things of that nature.
What kind of a grant is that?
BRIC, it's specific to it's like an emergency management type of grant. There's other ways that you can get creative on how it gets utilized that we've kind of spitballed, could we do this, could we do that?
But it's gone away totally?
It doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah,
So will it ever come back? Maybe, maybe not, but they've been pretty good to us as far as things that we already have in the hopper that we're planning on. They kind of did put a pause temporarily, and so we were being very cautious of that. But none of those broke the bank as far as like a cash flow situation or anything like that. So I would say no active grants are in peril. So
We had a pause put on us for the railroad crossing study, but they have reached out and initiated meetings on that again because there were meetings scheduled and then they just stopped. We were told those were temporarily on hold, but they have started them up again. So that is a good sign, because that is step one in moving towards funding of a potential future overpass on North Broadwell.
And I was concerned right off the bat when a lot of these funding streams were being withheld and, people are being penalized. My concern to Ryan was, is the lead pipe replacement thing in trouble now? And he assured me that at least, was it $5 million? I think you said still controlled by the state, so that was safe. My concern is with the changes we have in some of these high-ranking positions where health doesn't seem to be quite as important as it used to be, that people say, oh, a little bit of lead's not going to hurt you, let's stop this program. So I'm hoping that stays intact, and it sounds like at least $5 million of that is still available of what we can use. And so that was a good news, at least that point.
yeah, we've got multiple people across multiple departments that are actively watchdogging that sort of stuff between legal, admin, Libby being grants administrator. I mean, we're constantly keeping an eye on all of the moving parts just to make sure that something doesn't bite us down the road. And so,
Well, and that's just it, because we're early in the process, but there comes a point where we have to say, this is where we have to start, and where, what's our confidence level?
I would say we are probably good. This is just my own opinion of where we're at on any active and open agreements and grants. But a lot of those doors will close in the future, and we just won't have quite as many opportunities. So we'll just have to either be more creative, or we will, write grants that we maybe haven't done in the past for different types of things. But I would say anything that we kind of have actively in the works, we're probably okay right now. So.
Okay, very good, thank you.
Else? Okay. That's all I have. And then you will see Pat and I soon enough, I'm sure. So.
Our next agenda item is Future of Grand Island Power Generation. Mr. Schmitz.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Stop me if you have questions. We'll kind of buzz through this. It's an in-depth topic, but we'll try to cover it from a higher level so we can get understanding. So this is Grand Island's portfolio right here of assets. About half of our nameplate generation comes from coal right now, and it's served us well. And as you can see, the ages, we've done a good job of staggering the ages of our generation assets and the types of those assets, which is good. The two generation stations we're following most closely are PGS and CT1, or GT1 as we call it. Platt was under the microscope here with the Clean Air Act rules that were being initiated at the end of the Biden administration. And basically the rules, the requirements that were associated with those rules would have made it very hard to keep Platt online beyond January 1st, 2032. So we are watching that very closely. That appears to be going to be stayed here, which grants PGS extended life, which we're happy for. And then GT1 is more of an age thing. It's just like with any asset, eventually the maintenance costs reach a point where it's no longer a viable asset. We're not there yet, but that's something we're cognitive of. And GT1 is a 13 megawatt asset and PGS is 100 megawatts. So we can look at the history here. So this is the history of how much excess generation Grand Island has carried since 1978. The light green bars show you the excess, and then the dark green bars on the far right are if we built out a minimum. So we're looking at, I'm showing you both ends of the options here. 22 megawatts, let me back up just a second. We have 4.1 million that we pay towards our bond every year. That 4.1 million will be paid off in August of 2028. So the 22 megawatt option is basically what would happen if we just reinvest that 4.1 million back into new generation. And the 37 megawatt is more of an optimal number for us, which will show both ends of that. So basically the dark green is what if we built out 22 megawatts, what would that do? And as you see on the right there through 2024 and 27, bouncing up in 28 is because we actually contracted out some of that excess for a profit for the utility, and it comes back to us in 28. The red bar is the approximate capacity of PGS, and then the brown bar is PGS coupled with GT1. And why those are significant is that's what the green bars would have to reach up to if we lost one or both of those assets. That's our makeup gap. So this is a 37 megawatt option. So as you can see, the green bars are a little bit closer to the red bar. So what that means is if we were to pick this option and say another administration came down the road and we had to retire PGS at whatever point in time, we're very close to the excess we need to cover that loss. And so your build out at that point would be very small versus larger. To give you a context of what we've carried for debt service historically. So this is a debt service with a CPI adjustment. So this is all in today's dollars. So as you can see, back to 1955, the graph goes. So Steam 1, 2, and 3 were the old Burdick units that were torn down here in the last 15 years. And then PGS came, and you can see it was a fairly sizable debt the city took out to build PGS, which has paid itself off over time. GT2 and 3, they're in the early 2000s. And then the AQCS was the emissions controls equipment that was put on the back end of PGS around 2014. And then you can see in 2028, if we did nothing, the blue would basically go to zero. And to give a true picture, we wanted to show the orange, which basically the orange shading is debt that we pay through contracted services. So it's not on our books, but we have contracts for that generation with other entities, and that's what we pay through our payments to them. So just to give you a snapshot. So we're at a lower point. We're kind of at a point where we were back in the 60s. For debt or lower if we were to add 22 megawatts or even, here's 37 pictures. You see it jump up on the right hand of the screen? So with 37 megawatts, our indebtedness would be very similar to where we were when we built GT2 and 3, and also steam unit 3 and GT1. Here's kind of the backbone of those financials and how we came to those talking points. The chart on the left-hand side was done by Janney, which is our bonding agency, and they basically did a contingency for us for what happens if interest rates go up, interest rates go down between now and 2028, and then also we used a fairly conservative number of $3 million per megawatt. We have a lot of advantages. It's not a greenfield site. So since we tore down Burdick Station units 1, 2, and 3, we have substation capacity there, we have the site availability, and we have a gas line there that has excess capability for us. So we have a lot of good things in place that cheapen the overall cost of if it was a greenfield site. So how these numbers came to be is you have the total debt, which for the 37 megawatt option is $7 million. We have the $4.1 million that will fall off, that's offsetting. You have a capacity market. So the capacity, if you don't need it in the short term, you can sell it. And the sale price of that right now, conservatively, would net about $2.2 million a year on the 37 megawatt option. And then O&M estimates are $1.5 million for 37 megawatts. And so the end result is basically we'd be short $2.2 million a year, which is equatable to about a 3% increase in rates. I'm not saying we would need a 3% increase in rates, but for the sake of this study, I want it to be transparent. So that's what the estimated shortness we would be is about 3%. Where the 22 megawatt option, I won't go line by line, but as it works its way out, it's basically negligible to rates. We would be able to sell any excess capacity to basically wash that financially. To do this, the beauty of our situation is we have staff, trained staff, that's capable of maintaining and operating these assets with minimal additional staff, which, again, takes your fixed costs, your labor fixed costs, and spreads them out over more megawatts, which makes the whole fleet more efficient. And let me point out, through restructuring, we have existing positions. So these aren't new positions, it would be repurposing positions for these two that are listed here. The first one is an operation trainer. And why is that important? Well, in 2013, the average service time of our operators was 32 years, which is pretty impressive. In 2025, it's 9 years. So that's the amount of retirements we've been through just in that amount of time. And with that comes, you've got to train staff. So we didn't have to worry about that for many years. We're to a point where we do. We spend $40,000 a year on outside training, so that's an offsetting cost that would go away. This position would act as a liaison to train staff on the new generation assets before they're being operated, in addition to training them on the existing fleet that we have. And then one other thing we're looking at doing is right now we carry 4 operators on shift, and we have 5 shifts. One of those operators is dedicated to the water system at all times. So we're looking at, for efficiencies, moving the water system over to our dispatch center and having them just take on the water system at no additional FTEs. So over time, through retirements, that could potentially let us get down to 15 operators from 20. So it would be about, and what we're after, the big picture is, at some point, whether it's 2035, 2040, 2045, there will be a day PGS goes away. And we want to streamline our staffing to the point where everybody has a home under the new fleet. So we want safety and reliability first, but within those boundaries, we want to streamline our staffing. So this operation trainer, I believe, is necessary for safety, and there are intrinsic savings that come with stuff getting damaged because a person didn't know how to operate it, right? And so it offsets itself over time. The other position, which I would look at as a 5 to 6 year position, we have 7 EIC techs, which are electrical instrumentation and controls technicians. The average age of our 7-person staff is 63, which is great right now, but one day majority of your staff goes out the door at the same time, which is not so great. So what we'd like to do is create a position where we could take one of those senior staff and have them basically train their replacement and act as a participant in the generation, design, and build. So as we're working with a consultant, they would have input into that design and build and use their expertise. And then when that person of expertise would retire, the position would go away. So it would be a transitional type position. The schedule we're looking at, so generation is a very slow process. To get permitted through Southwest Power Pool, you have to go through an interconnection study, which we're looking at all the options available right now, but it can take as long as 4+ years. To procure equipment can take 3 to 4 years. And then you have a design phase, you have a permitting phase. And so to get the ball rolling, they have one window into the analysis every year. The next one opens in April of '26. So the purpose of this timing of this presentation is to basically be on the same page with council as far as going out and getting a consultant in place to help us navigate that process. That's the first step. And then with the idea that the chunk of the costs would start to hit about the time the current debt falls off in '28. So we're trying to line that up. So the options at hand are basically we can do nothing, and then what would happen is we would hopefully continue to have minimal excess capacity, and the 4.1 million would eventually get gobbled up by rates over time. And then what would happen is eventually we would be short capacity and we would have to do drastic rate increases because we'd have no offsetting costs. And so it would look good in the near term, but long term we would have pain and suffering at some point. You would have a drastic rate increase to float that. That's not our recommendation. 2 would be we could build out 22 megawatts. It gets us closer to where we need to be if we were to ever have PGS forced offline. It's again, you're short at the end. You're much shorter when that happens, so you've got more build out. But it's a step in the right direction. And then option 3 would be the 37 megawatt build out. You have the risk of a minimal rate increase of 3% estimated, but we're much closer to where we need to be if we were to lose PGS as regulation wise. And so to me right now, because of the current administration in Washington, there's kind of a step back and a breath, which takes a little pressure off the rush on natural gas units, which is where everybody's being directed. So I can only see that the cost getting worse when everybody's pushed there in a quick manner. And so if we can build out now, it's going to be costly, but I have a feeling it's going to be much more costly under a different administration with different prerogatives. So,
Well, it sounds like 37 is the prudent path forward.
that's our preferred. And really what we're asking for is the $111 million expenditure that comes with it, because we will do our best to maximize what we're able to get or within that boundary. So 37 megawatts is an estimate based on a $3 million per megawatt expenditure. Yes?
That's,
30 years. So
looking out at 2050, what are we looking at for need? Because there's a whole lot of AI coming out that is a power drain.
nailing it. And so there's our assets again. So as you can see, as we get to, you're talking 2050, basically Wayland 2 and Nebraska City 2, those contracts will be up around that time, right? And those are both coal contracts. PGS will probably be phased out. I can't remember where I've seen it in the books, but I see PGS, I believe, was intended to be up to 2050 if maintenance costs didn't catch up to you. So I think between now and then regulation's going to get us before maintenance gets us. I would like with the current administration, I look at PGS being 2035 to 2040. And my personal belief is that the small modular reactors everybody reads about, it's gonna take closer to 2040 for the supply chain to be built out on those. All the prototypes go in 2030, and then they gotta build out the supply chain, and then Nebraska's on the cheap side of power, so we're gonna be one of the last that it's economical. But if those will be, hopefully be an option before 2050. So I think there'll be newer technologies.
And there's probably a better option. What's the projection on natural gas costs by 2050? Because I've seen natural gas costs a whole lot higher than what they are right now.
Yes, they've been low recently, so they're $3 to $4 a decatherm, which is cheap by industry standards. I don't think anybody knows. I don't know.
And nobody wants to guess.
Yeah, it's there was a big thing on LNG that we're going to ship LNG, which is liquefied natural gas, to Europe, and then it never really materialized. So we ended up long as a country. So as far as generation goes, it's very hard to look out that far because the technologies are changing so fast. The reason we kind of zeroed in on 37 megawatts is it gets us close to where we need to be, but it also leaves room for if a technology like an SMR becomes available by 2035 or 2040, we can participate. And I would guess the early ones would be a conjoined effort between multiple utilities in the state. And then once the technology is understood, you'll start seeing people fragment off. That's my guess.
On the modular.
Yeah, so by doing 37, we get closer where we want to be, but we still leave room to entertain other options.
Because we're still looking at, going to need 100 megs.
Well, and you nailed it, because with all these loads coming on, we were just talking to a 10 megawatt load today. So if your excess is, 60 megawatts and you take on 10, that drops that green bar that much further. So the size of the loads coming in today are at a magnitude never before seen. I mean, it used to be if you had 1 megawatt, that's huge. Now you're seeing 10 or more. And
now Bitcoin farm uses that in hours.
Bitcoin farm, manufacturing centers. We've had two different types of manufacturing that reach 14 megawatt asks that are not solidified yet, but are asking questions. We've had data center that's 10 megawatt, but they want more than 10 if they can get it. So sometimes we have to reel them in to say, hey, we're also preserving this for a greater economic option as well. So we have to watch capacity and generation, capacity and substations. You're torn between giving up too much and then restricting yourself from someone else because of the time it takes to build out stuff. If you read the news, a lot of utilities have gotten themselves kind of behind the 8 ball because of the time it takes to build out and waiting to pull that trigger. And now you're kind of out of the economic development game until you can get the capacity built out. So I don't want us to get in that situation.
I realize that it'd be expensive, but I also realize I'd like to see our electric rates stay down, and that's one way to do it. I've seen other councils drag their feet on other projects, and they go from 20 million to 80 million just in a matter of
we have a huge benefit with the 4.1 offset coming into play.
Yeah.
The timing works out really well, and if we can let rates eat that up, and we can say, hey, we're not raising rates because we're just going to eat up that 4.1 every year, and then eventually it's eaten up, and we're back here having the same conversation, and there is no offset cost. So that's the risk.
Thanks, Ryan.
Mark?
I just want to make sure I understand that you're planning on building an addition to the power plant, and have you looked at the alternatives of solar and wind and that you presently have?
Yes, we have a wind farm near Neely, and we just built out solar. We're looking to build out dispatchable. So to give you a little insight on how wind works, that 35.8 megawatts that it shows there that we own, as far as what the market gives us capacity accreditation for, 12. Because it's saying basically it's not reliable all the time. So even though you own 35.8, we're going to give you credit for 12. Okay? The coal plant has 100, they're giving us 100 credit. Gas plant, you have 34, you get 34 credit. So 35. And so that's the game. So at this point, we built out solar. So we just added the 10 megawatt solar, which is great. It's doing its job. But now at this point, we want to make sure we have enough dispatchable, which means we can call on it whenever we need it. Because if we were to lose PGS one day, we want to make sure we have something that we can call on when we need it to replace it.
Do you feel this is the right way to go, considering the political winds in Washington, D.C., the way they've been in the past and what they are now?
Basically, the rules have funneled everybody to gas. And gas with an oil backup is our best option. So if you can't get gas in the pipeline, because it's not physically on site, you have enough oil to run for 2 to 3 days on diesel fuel. And so they haven't attacked natural gas like they've attacked coal, because they realize there has to be some option for dispatchable until the small modular reactors become viable, which they're working on. But until we have something that we can tell it to run when we want it to run, we have to have some option. Right now, natural gas is the only option you can build.
Have you looked at putting natural gas in at the power plant?
Yes. So this site we're looking at is Burdick, right? We've been in contact with Northwestern Gas, and they actually have been looking at running a pipeline down the frontage of PGS. So we're working with them right now to see the viability of beefing up that line for the pressures we need. Should PGS go away one day, then that site could be viable.
When I first came on council, I talked to, I can't remember Tom or whoever it was right before you.
Tim?
But he said that the cost of putting a line in was like $1 million.
Yeah, so at that time, the narrative from Tallgrass, which is the parent gas company, was we're gas restricted and we're not letting anybody build out gas. And then that Tallgrass has had some turnover at the top, and the whole narrative's changed. So Northwestern Gas, on a whim, we reached out to them a year and a half ago, and Lynn and I talked to him, and he's like, yeah, we've changed. We're looking at building a pipeline right down Wildwood. And we're like, whoa, okay. We got some synergies there. So yes, the narrative changed from that time when Tim said that. That was the talk at the time.
So it'd be really beneficial for you and for the city to have that.
Yes. And so that's a parallel path we're continuing to monitor.
I'm in favor of it, because that'll save you some money. Thank you.
Okay, so my questions are at a basic level, because everything that you talk about is Greek to me, and it's what you live in every day. Okay, so you're talking Greek, a lot of Greek tonight to me. But I'm still trying to understand how we fit. Grand Island isn't just responsible for power for Grand Island. We're part of a bigger network, a pool, I guess. So is that the Southwest Power Pool you're talking about? So we are part of a group of other utilities who all support a certain amount of power to a region. How big is that region?
It runs from North Dakota all the way down to the tip of Texas, the top of Texas, into western part of Arkansas, and everything in between.
I kind of basically remember a map I've seen before where you showed that. How many other utilities are part of that pool?
Oh, I don't know, a lot.
Okay, so my question is, here's Grand Island trying to come up with a plan. What do we know that all the other people that are part of that pool that are, because I don't know if we're just responsible for certain megawatts for our area or for megawatts of the entire requirement. So my question is, if you're working on this project to try to beef up stuff here, and somebody in South Dakota is working on a project here to beef up, who's looking at the big picture to say that we now have created excess capacity that we don't need, and how's that all being coordinated?
So the last part of your question, Southwest Power Pool's looking at it. And how the requirements work is each year we report our peak city load of all time, right? And just generalize our peak city load. And then if you look at the top right of that that page up there, that percent, as you see the year and then you see the percent, that's how much beyond your peak load you have to own in capacity. And so it keeps going up. So right now, we have to own, Grand Island's peak load is about 174 megawatts. That's our peak load, peak day, peak hour. We have to own that plus 15% to buy and sell in the market. And so that's what these green lines of excess are. In 2026, they're adding more requirements on what you have to carry. And in 2029, they're already talking about adding more. So beyond carrying what you need now, you have to be cognizant of the requirements keep growing. And so everybody has to meet that quota, and that's how they do it. It's based on your own peak load, and you have to support your own peak load plus whatever they dictate.
Okay, so we are responsible for a certain amount of that big pie that they're needing. So, and that's the role that you're playing.
And the current market lays out well for municipals, I think, because the people with larger territory who are all lumped together, if this guy builds out a lot of new load, right? He builds out a big manufacturing facility, everybody's got to share the pain for the generation needed for that and all the economics. Municipal, as a municipal, we're just for ourselves. So if we build out something, we get the benefit of whatever we build out, so we're paying for the cost for our own benefit. We're not paying our cost for somebody across the state who's lumped in with us. So it's a nice position to be in. We're at our own mercy, so to speak.
So in effect, you really are required to cover your own share for your territory.
Exactly.
So
Yep.
so even though you're part of a bigger power pool, they're saying you're part of this pool, but you own your smaller region, and you need to be able to produce X number of megawatts and that capacity. So that's why you are interested in making sure that Grand Island continues to meet their requirements. So that's why we're having this conversation then.
So if we eat up all our capacity, basically the market says you can't add any load until you find more capacity. And so that means no economic development of any significant size, you are capped. And so that's how it is. And now you got to go out and try to buy it from someone else at extreme cost, usually.
Okay, so that's your option. If you don't have it, you're going to have to buy it. So we talk about the potential of PGS going away. That's 100 megawatts, you say? You know, when it does come, is your goal now we have to be able to replace that 100 megawatts in the next X number of years? Because this is only buying us 37 of that 100. What happens if PGS goes away?
Well, if we had 37, you can see we're closer to that red line. So we may have to build out another 20 or 30 to get there. Because right now we do have excess, right? So it's just how much excess do we want to carry? And then we can stagger it in. But there's no right number on how much excess to carry because nobody has a crystal ball. If I knew what size loads or how fast Grand Island was going to grow, I could tell you that, but we don't. So you try to carry enough to give you enough time to build out more before you run out. Because the other side of going out and buying capacity rather than owning it, if we have an event like Uri where power prices go through the roof and they're $3,000 a megawatt, we're buying every megawatt our city's using, we're paying $3,000. We better have something producing that same megawatt and selling it at $3,000, or we're just upside down $3,000. So if you go buy capacity from someone else, I don't have any energy with that. So if I run a Uri event, I could be upside down millions. I mean, tens of millions in a 7-day event. So you got to be very careful about having something that's actually dispatchable.
Appreciate your forethought looking at this because this is part of the thing you do, so I appreciate that part.
We have a good group. It's not just me, so.
Well,
yeah.
yep. So I'm just trying to understand how this all fits into the big picture, and it sounds like it's a very necessary part of the big picture because you own your region. You really are in charge of responsibility for your region, and that's what you're asking us today. And I would concur that 37 megawatts obviously is probably the way you want to go first. You said that the Platte generation station, you think, at least your best guess right now, is still got another 10-plus years?
We're looking at, so it has major outages every 6 years, so you hope, those are expensive endeavors, so you hope to get the 6 years out of it. So our next one will be in 2029, which will clear, and then that will take us to 2035. So it really, right now, we think 2035 is very safe, but there will be another presidential election between now and then, and some of these rules could go back the other way, and then we're having a different discussion. So the 37 puts us in a position where, well, if the rules don't change and PGS stays around, say till 2040, 45, we didn't overspend. We're not sitting on a bunch of excess, you know. It's like anything else, you want to use close to what you need. You don't want a ton of excess, and you don't want to be too tight. And so I think this puts us in a decent situation without breaking the bank either, where we're going out for extreme rate increase to make it happen.
And to Mark's point, when you were talking about potential turbines at the current PGS, you know, then that's another whole ballgame with, I don't know how many millions of dollars that entails, but you basically knock that plant down and put these where that plant is, or what do you think?
We can do that. Another option which we can study is at that time converting PGS to just a gas plant, where basically you run the gas into the boiler at PGS and it becomes a box. And the efficiency isn't the same, but it will count as capacity, right? Which is what we need. So
there are some options even on that. Won't be terribly expensive at that point, I wouldn't think, compared with rebuilding something totally.
We'd have to, we'll study it between now and then for sure.
Okay, very good. I'm just trying to understand how we all fit in the big picture, and I think I do.
Are we looking at, I think Mike might have mentioned it, that AI is going to cause a drain, technologies are going to cause a drain, but are we also looking at programs to implement that can be less of a drain, whether it be with commercial or residential usage, being more high efficiency, things like that? Are we factoring any of that in, and are there things we can do and look at to impact just the day-to-day need?
As far as subsidies, or I guess?
Just anything. I mean, just projecting it out, hoping that there's things we can do, because yes, it's the most, I mean, the cost is a big part of this, but supporting ratepayers in other ways, I suppose, whether it's a subsidy or other programs. I know federal programs are probably not the way to look today, but are there things that we're looking at all to just reduce the need through that high efficiency?
It's tough. You'll see on TV where OPPD will have smart meters, right? Your smart thermostats, which everybody's fine with, except when it's 105 degrees out and the utility goes, okay, now we're gonna keep your temperature above 82 in your house. You're like, whoa, right? And so now everybody's fine with it until it gets called on. And so the cost to implement those programs versus the actual return and the political fallout, to be honest, a lot of times isn't worth it. And I mean, there's some that subsidize just for the sake of subsidizing. For instance, air-to-air heat pump, you know, you'll hear that. And those will go down below, once they get below, I don't know, 20 degrees, they kind of kick to electric backup heat, right? So they're really viable in the spring and fall. Well, guess where we have the cheapest power? Spring and fall. So it's not that we don't want to, we're open to anything. You know, I've talked to different people and say, if you can present a financial neutral impact, we're good with whatever. Also, I mean, if council wants to incentivize stuff, that's something too, but I just can't sit here and tell you it's a financial windfall for us, so.
I guess just kind of like some of these guys have said, like to look at other, you know, what other options are on there. I assume you're looking at these things, these other options, but just so we have a clear picture of what other.
Helped us with one last June. So I don't know if everybody fully understood some of the things that passed, but one of them was an interruptible rate. And now, as we've explained this, what the interruptible rate for these data centers or these Bitcoin guys, what that allows us to do now is we have a tariff that we can allow them to be under, where they come in when we're not pushing new peak loads, they run. And all of a sudden, if they're gonna make us set a new peak, which requires us to buy new capacity, we can take them offline. And that's how you do this, so they don't push you to a higher capacity, but yet they run when you're at lower loads. And so that tariff, we're talking to an entity right now. We've had a few come. There's one that's becoming more serious that would fit under that tariff. We haven't. Another one you guys helped pass is a cogen rate. Why is that a big one? Because one of the industrials that's looking to come to town manufactures their own solar panels. Well, what does that mean? Well, if they build out their own solar on site, they're offsetting their own load, right? So it doesn't count towards our capacity requirement because they're catering their own. So you guys, through last summer, without probably understanding all the mechanisms, help pass things that are tools for us to use now in regard to what you're asking. Yeah.
Yep. Thank you.
Ryan.
I have a few questions. So as far as putting in a new unit, whether you go with the 22 or the 37, obviously be a gas or / diesel unit. And I was talking to Lynn last week about some of this stuff as well. I kind of understand there's maybe two types of units, and like how much more efficient would something like this be than CT2 or CT3?
There's different options. So you have, with efficiency comes cost, right? So you have to balance cost versus efficiency. There are reciprocating units, there are aeroderivative units, and there are frames, and they go in that order in efficiency. And then also within that, there's different sizes. A lot of the RICE units come in 9 megawatts or 18 megawatts, so you'd be aggregating. They're even coming out as small as like 5 megawatt engines that you can aggregate together. So part of hiring the consultant would be to look at that and pick that balance between cost and efficiency, and how it would operate in the market.
And just try and keep the rates as competitive as possible.
Exactly, yep.
And then just to touch on what Jack was saying a little bit too, and you guys are talking about the smart thermostats, and I'm kind of familiar with the plan that OPPD has. And basically their plan is if you enroll on that, they give you a $100 credit in your bill, then you get another credit anytime you get throttled. And it's kind of interesting because you mentioned some people don't like their air at 82 or someone at 70. And I've learned a lot about human beings and air conditions the last few years. And I can tell you, I know some people that love it, in the low 80s, and some people have to have it at 66. And I think there might be some interest. It might be worthwhile looking at. I don't know how tough it would be to implement.
So OPPD had theirs in the paper one time so OPPD's peak is 3,000 megawatts, right? They shaved their load by 5 or 6 megawatts using the smart thermostat. So if you unpack that, that's like 0.6%. So if you do 0.6% on us, that's less than 1 megawatt.
Yeah, not enough to scale, really.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it becomes fairly negligible, and then you'd have to have staff to carry out the program. So it's a great idea. I'm just saying economically, if someone can paint the picture or we find a fit that works, we're open to things.
That's kind of interesting. One other thing I want to touch on too, there's a little bit of talk about data centers and and all that. And really the cost of electric use for AI is really where the data centers are built. Currently there's none of those really around here. And typically they like to build data centers where you have a lot of fiber connections, which Grand Island now has 6 fiber providers in town that I'm aware of. And then they like to be where you have the cheapest electricity. And I think you're saying earlier we're around the cheapest in the state right now?
We're the cheapest residential rates.
Yeah, or cheapest residential state. And I think you said you had 1 or 2. I don't know how many data center providers have kind of been talking to you guys the last few years.
Yeah, so that's the beauty of it. So a data center, if it comes in, say you have 10 megawatts, right? That's a pretty decent windfall for the city as far as the amount of energy they use too, because they pay sales tax, they pay in lieu of tax, which comes back to the city. And so if you can get them in, find a place where they're not overloading a substation, and then have them curtailable so they don't count towards your capacity, you can kind of find a situation where everybody wins, but you got to be very careful, or they will come in and gobble up your substation capacity or your generation capacity.
That's why I think it's important to have the capacity to potentially attract one of these, because it could also be a good employer in the area as well. But yeah, I know that, I've seen a lot of them come to town and they talk. I haven't really seen us lay anything yet, but I suppose you have to kind of have the infrastructure for them to really be interested, so.
Careful thing with those guys is they will come in for, they'll want 5, 10 megawatts, and they'll say, we're gonna provide 3 jobs. And it's kind of, you know, as an
Yeah.
economic side, we're torn besides, because the utility's fine, but if we let them come in and gobble up an entire substation for 3 jobs, and now an employer wants to come to town that's gonna offer 500 jobs, we've now got 3 years to build out a new substation. So it's a game, like it's a constant game. And that's the difference between, say, a Bitcoin thing and a true data center like your Googles or Facebooks, who are providing probably a lot more jobs.
Yeah, you have to be very particular. There's 2 very different types of data centers, absolutely, so. No, thanks, Ryan.
Yep. Good.
Excellent meeting, council members. We've completed our agenda. We are adjourned.
Thanks, Ryan.